This is Chattanooga Civics. I'm Nathan Bird. Mayor Kelly has been in office for 1 year. I sat down with him to discuss his goals, his successes, and his challenges. Before we start, I'm excited to announce the launch of the Chattanooga Civics newsletter. Keeping up to date with local government can be tedious. Not everyone has time to go to every city council meeting or to parse through the legalese of the official minutes. The Chattanooga Civics newsletter will summarize the major civic events of each week into a single, easy-to-read email. The newsletter will go out every Monday starting on May 9th. Sign up today at ChattanoogaCivics.com. One last thing, I want to thank my Patreon sponsors, especially the Marks family, for supporting the show at the highest level. Please consider supporting the show at patreon.com/chatcivics. All right, Mayor Kelly, welcome back to Chattanooga Civics. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for making time in your busy schedule.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, I just want to start off really broadly. You have released a One Chattanooga strategic plan. That's kind of the framework for your administration. Yes. And I just wanted you to spend a couple minutes talking about that and, get people up to date on what that is, how they can find it, and, how we can keep track of it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure when the podcast is going to be released, but it's kind of like the worst kept secret in Chattanooga at this point because we've talked to so many community partners about it, but it hasn't publicly officially been released. In concept, I think it's really important though, because essentially it's a strategic framework for what we plan to do over the course of the next 3 years and maybe more, and then how we kind of plan to do it, including 7 key strategies. It has a set of, values that we think are really important because, as it literally says in the document, I'm a big fan of that old saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if we don't talk about that, that's a huge part of it. So it's a 40-page document. I mean, it's not a 2-page executive summary. There's a lot to it, but we spent a lot of time thinking through it, and so it will be out soon. And at that point, I'm sure it'll be posted on the city website.
Great,
Chattanooga.gov. Yeah.
I'm not sure where I found it. Then I'm scratching my head because I have it printed out at home and I've read through it a couple times. So
that's outstanding. Yeah, I mean, there have been. We've shared it with the Equitable Recovery Commission, which actually probably the best vote of confidence we got is we gave it to them and said, look, if it stinks or if there's something missing, tell us, right? I mean, you're welcome to make any edits and carve it up. That's one of the reasons we haven't publicly released it yet. But they didn't. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of McKinsey & Company. That consultancy likes to talk about, which I love as a framework, things that are MECE is the acronym they use, mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. In other words, it needs to talk about everything, but not be duplicative and sort of fit together in a comprehensive way. And I think it does, right? So we can talk about any element. I mean, we can spend the rest of the podcast talking about it, honestly, because there's a lot to it. But I do think I think we're making one last minute edit to it around transportation. But what you saw is largely the plan. And again, we've shared it with the faith community. We've shared it with the philanthropic community, just saying like, are we on base, off base? And I think we're there.
Good. Well, everybody listening, keep an eye out for that grand release. And that'll be the framework for the next, like you said, next 3 or maybe more years.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to just, start off real broad and just see how things are going. And I want to know, what is the accomplishment that you've been most proud of in your first year here as mayor? I know there's been a lot going on and a lot of it has just been kind of laying the groundwork.
Well, that's it, right? And so this is stuff that is not politically exciting, but I'm probably most proud of the talent we've been able to attract to Chattanooga from elsewhere, and because largely, again, it's I'm not casting aspersions on prior administrations in any way, shape, or form. A lot of it was just due to COVID, but things were kind of a mess, and so and then some of it was a change in strategic focus. I mean, not radically different. I wouldn't say. I mean, we kept a lot of folks in a lot of positions here, but others have changed. And I mean, again, we can go into detail there, but in the aggregate, right, we've spent, I would say, 75 or 80% of our time just rewiring and fixing and getting to go back to another kind of hackneyed old business book analogy, getting the right people in the right seats on the bus and getting the bus going in the right direction. We're still very much involved in that, but we've been able to attract some really phenomenal talent who, again, almost pains me to say, but I mean, probably the greatest testament to the achievement and to these people's, and there's more than one, dedication to the cause is that they took some pretty big pay cuts to come to work at the city. I mean, we can't compete, with the private market, particularly up at the executive level.
Right.
But these are all people who came here because they believed in the mission that we were, and the vision that we're projecting for the city, and they believe in the future of the city and its incredible potential, as I do. So that is definitely my proudest accomplishment thus far.
Yeah. Do you mind just giving kind of a quick who's who of, letting people know who's in charge of what departments?
Yeah, you can see the remains of some of the org chart up there. We're looking, for those of you watching at home, or not watching at home, but there's a big whiteboard here with a lot of scrabbling on it, and the thing in the middle is kind of what's left. That it was covered with the whole org chart, and so we there are a bunch. I mean, we can go department by department, but again, we attracted Dr. Mary Lambert, our director of community health, who, I mean, is a full bird colonel, has worked at the CDC and the Department of Defense. I mean, my God, so far below her pay grade, right? But Chattanooga's her home. She loves it. She will probably return at some point to teaching at Vanderbilt, but she was a huge get. Tamara Stewart, who just took over as our chief equity officer, came to us from TVA. I don't know what sort of cut she took, but I know she took one because, again, she believes in what we're doing here and our ability to really affect structural change in the interest of equity. Scott Martin, the guy that came to take over Parks and Outdoors, came from a really highly regarded nonprofit in Louisville that was working on parks issues there, and in his own right, a rock star in the Parks and Outdoors world, and was not even looking for a job per se. He later told us that he just, Chattanooga's reputation preceded it in the outdoor and parks world. And that if he could, have it be in this reframed Parks and Outdoors department here, that this is where he wanted to bring his family and retire. He was a huge get. Dan Reuter, the head of planning, came up from Atlanta, was on the Atlanta Regional Planning Commission. He's seen it all before, particularly on the scale of Chattanooga, a couple of times, right? So. Our public works director, Tom Hutka, undergraduate degree from Princeton and a graduate degree from Harvard, and a public works director, mind you, and he came from a larger market in Florida. And the list just goes on and on. Tyson Morris, the guy who is our new we're calling IT now technology services, but it's IT is what you would call it, but he came from Coca-Cola corporate in Atlanta because he wanted to be in Chattanooga, right? And so the list goes on and on, as I was saying. And again, we really have, it's been hard work to do all those interviews and sift through all those resumes. And again, that's just the top layer of management. There are many below that. Right. And I should mention too, Ryan Ewalt, again, our COO, who came from, he was at VW and then was at Unum, and is a completely apolitical fixture here. Doesn't know or care a thing about politics, dirty little secret. Neither do I really. He is dedicated entirely to helping me reframe the culture at the city and rebuild cohesive organizational structure and really kind of the muscle of the organization to be able to serve the citizens of Chattanooga better. And again, it's from the outside looking in, I mean, that's just boring. It's like watching a duck swim across a pond. You can't see the little feet going, but they're going hard, right? And it's really, really important work. So that it's kind of a go slow to go fast thing, and that it will pay great dividends later. But again, I wish I could, it would be easier to be able to point to some big monument or something that we had built tangible, but it's really, really important, and I'm proud of it.
So this might be the same answer, it sounds like, just based off of, all the interviews you had to do and everything. Yeah. But what has been the biggest challenge of this first year as mayor?
Well, that's been it, right? Depending on, we had some departments here. Shout out to our fire department. Really a shining example of a department that was really focused in on mission, not at all confused about why they're here. Really, really, just a fantastic. I mean, we didn't have to lift a finger, right? But just really, really, really well led under Chief Phil Hyman. But that was not the case everywhere. So the challenges were plenty in various departments, and particularly in certain internal departments that were really critical to the functioning of other departments like HR. I think it'd been a long time, very frankly, since we had a mayor that was really focused on, for lack of a better word, management and HR in particular. Again, some fantastic people down there. I'm not trying to, cast aspersions on anybody that was there prior. A lot of it was just not being tuned in and sort of tied together, and a lack of leadership. But anybody that's been in any company of any size knows that if HR is not functioning well, nothing is going to function well. I mean, you're literally only as good as your people. So the challenge has really been, and again, COVID was a massively disruptive event, not just the pathogen and the public health piece, but what it did to organizations just in terms of just scattering everybody and everything to the wind. And so, again, getting everybody back on the same page, back in the office, and kind of getting everybody reoriented around our mission, which is, I think, pretty well elucidated in the One Chattanooga plan, has been a big challenge.
So I want to shift into some kind of more focused policy questions.
Yeah.
And I want to start with your affordable housing initiative.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you announced this a couple weeks ago. Just a couple numbers from the press release. You cited a 5,000 unit affordable housing shortage that you plan to address with, I think it was $30-something million in public money.
Yep.
That will then leverage another $60-something million in public money. So I just want to start by asking, where's that number coming from for the 5,000 affordable unit shortage? How did you arrive at that?
There are, as wouldn't surprise you to learn probably, a lot of nonprofits and think tanks out there who do this, and that's an estimate, right? It's an estimate we've derived. I would say it's somewhere between 3,500 and 5,000. But look, it's a one house at a time strategy, or one unit at a time. I'd say. I mean, we're big believers in density and densification. Multifamily housing is not a bad word, and part of our challenge is going to be around making folks understand that. But it certainly is a crisis in that the median house here has gone from, I want to say, like 190,000 to 290 or 280 and change. I mean, it's a meteoric jump, and no question it's related to the rise in homelessness, and it's driving out historical residents of Chattanooga. So ultimately, the economic equivalent of the law of gravity is supply and demand. So we're working with the private market and with the philanthropic community to really look at how we can create creative capital stacks to unlock more investment. And again, some of this is supply chain related, obviously, and hopefully that, knock on wood, is going to get better. But the urgency is very, very real.
So the $30 million in public money, where is that coming from? What funds is that being?
Some of it is
from?
carried over from last year's budget, surplus from last year's budget, which we were lucky that we are carrying forward another surplus.
Right.
Last year's surplus was used to help fund those raises for police and firefighters, which is not 24% is a massive jump, and that's what we had to do to just get to scale. So some of it is carried over from last year's budget. Some of it will be from this year's budget. Yeah, and some of it, I think, I'm trying to think of the exact number, but some of it, these on my desk here are all stacks of applications for the Equitable Recovery Commission, the American Rescue Plan dollars, and that draft will be out later. But not surprisingly, top of the list of concerns is affordable housing. So some of it will probably come from that federal pot of money as well.
Right. And so just to clarify, this is all that $30 million number. That's all cash. That's not
that's all cash.
Incentives or anything that's being kind of rolled in to make the number.
No, that's a real number. I mean, you can actually see it up there on the screen or on the whiteboard. About a third of it we expect will be direct subsidy. 2/3 of it will be financial instruments to try to incentivize development through community development, financial institutions, loans, et cetera. Interestingly, that piece on the left in orange, which you can't see at home, is not included in that number, but that is the city owns a ton of both surplus property, back tax property, and property that is probably that can be contributed to this effort, and that is not included in that number.
Okay.
So it's a significant commitment.
So is that something then I guess it's still being worked through in terms of how that land might get distributed and utilized?
Yeah, well, so what we're doing for sure is reconstituting the land bank. So we had a land bank which ponderously never conferred the first piece of property. I don't know why. I won't go back and relitigate the past, but it never did. But that's the idea. We had to actually, the charter expired. We had to stand it back up. The city will then confer the property to the land bank, and then the land bank will have its own board, and the land bank will then decide, whether to just contribute pieces of property outright, or how
land lease, or
something.
There's all sorts of mechanisms.
They may have enough property to charter or to contribute to. You see the other acronym up there, their own community land trust, which is another concept people should research, because that's another concept we've been looking at to help address the problem.
Yeah, no, I hope it's still up, but I believe Caleb did a study about community land trust.
That's where we got the idea. I mean, those guys were great. They brought us a study really an initial study from Burlington Associates, I think, out of Burlington, Vermont. And so that's where I first learned of the concept. And again, we are still moving in that direction.
So I'll link that study in the show notes, and I'll try and maybe hopefully do an episode just about that to kind of lay the groundwork.
That would be great.
Because it's a really interesting tool for sure.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of potential to it.
Absolutely.
So I want to talk about the private money now. How do you see that being utilized, and where do you see it even really coming from? I mean, are you assuming businesses are just going to build affordable housing in cash? Or
no, not at all.
What kind of incentives are at play here?
So there are a ton. It really, and this is, I'm not often, really. I mean, I'm generally very proud of how forward-thinking Chattanooga is as a community. I will say in this case, we are well behind the curve in the concept of impact investing, right? So I was just on a call this morning with the Heron Foundation. Again, if you want to link that in your show notes, the Heron Foundation is kind of the leader nationally in this type of work. Massive foundation that has switched over. So typically the way foundations work is, they have a giant portfolio of generally stocks and bonds, right? They get back, let's say, a 7% return. They keep 3% to kind of roll over to keep up with inflation, and they give away 4%. So they take the cream off the top, as it were, and they give that away as grants. What impact investing does is say, wait a minute, we're sitting on $100 million here. And what is it exactly? We bought bonds, from Exxon or, it's corporate debt or even municipal bonds from other cities, or we bought 1,000 shares of Microsoft. Does Microsoft have an office in Chattanooga? It does not, right? And so it goes back to kind of thinking about circular economy issues and saying, well, if there's a project and again, giant caveat, right? It's got to be a project that will provide returns so that the whole idea, the baseline, if you're a fiduciary for a foundation, is that you've got to be able to protect the corpus, right? It's got to be able to roll forward so that you can continue to do good. Mm-hmm. But if there are investment opportunities, locally, then you should be doing that, right? And they've been doing it at the Heron Foundation for over 20 years. And so this is not a wheel that needs to be reinvented. But the way that it works is that a lot of times philanthropic entities will come in and invest. And it might be, they may do a loan guarantee, or they may do an investment and say, look, we only need 3% return. Because why invest for 7% return and, keep 3 and give away 4 if all we, if we can keep 3 and then the rest is social return because we just help create affordable housing. It's a really powerful concept. And again, it is being used elsewhere broadly and not so much here yet. That in turn, I used the term earlier, creative capital stack. That in turn can de-risk private investment from banks, from community development, financial institutions, CDFIs, et cetera, right? So we're not. There's a way to do this without appealing to people's, higher moral selves. Although, that's great. There are private donor advised funds who can make investments in this sort of thing. But there are, and again, I don't want to bore people with the alphabet soups, but banks, again, thanks in this case to federal banking regulations, have a budget, right, or certain requirements for community reinvestment that they need to make for which they earn credits, and so. That's good. You can see 4% LIHTC is up there on the. I don't even know what LIHTC stands for, but banks. You then create the investment vehicle for banks to be able to invest in these projects as well. So I feel like we can get to our $100 million, particularly with with co-investment from philanthropy as I described, and again the city's now got a significant amount of skin in the game too.
Right. So what kind of projects is there even really a goal for what kinds of projects in particular this will be funding, or is this just kind of whatever we can grab? Is this going to new housing? It's housing vouchers.
It is
multifamily, single family.
It's all of the above. The basic premise is that because of that supply and demand issue, right? That if you create supply anywhere, you're going to help affordability everywhere. And so that is the idea. We're not going to we've said the fund will support everything up to 120% of average median income. Mm-hmm. That's not the right acronym. Annual median income, I suppose, but AMI, as it's commonly referred to, which would include workforce housing, right? So we're not talking about just what we would think of as housing projects, although that could certainly be part of it. Where, the current thinking in the planning and development community is really that mixed income housing works better anyway for a number of different reasons, right? So the redevelopment of the West Side, the College Hill Courts development will probably feature a lot of that, and it's a massive undertaking. Mm-hmm. But that's the angle that we're going to be looking to take, is more of that sort of mixed use and mixed income development.
Right. I kind of want to point out and maybe have you defend this a little bit. The supply and demand concept is surprisingly, to me, controversial to a lot of people. A lot of people just, for some reason, don't believe that housing follows that kind of supply and demand curve. So if you could just talk to that for a minute? Any studies you've seen or any resources you can point people to?
I could be naive, but I mean, again, I've been studying economics for my entire adult life. And I've yet to find anything that ultimately does not revert to supply and demand. There are market distortions that can kind of create little, dam walls that keep the market from functioning that way in temporary ways. But ultimately, it is always the answer. I mean, I don't know of a market in the history of mankind that doesn't eventually respond to supply and demand. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you increase the supply of something and the demand stays fixed, prices will fall.
Right.
So it's just it's the baseline rule of economics eventually, to me anyway. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I want to shift. This is related, and it's a tool that you've already talked about a little bit earlier on, but zoning. Is I'm sure going to play a big part in this affordable housing concept.
It will.
You talked about the transition to mixed use to middle density and making that shift to densifying our city a little bit.
Yep.
So one of the first examples, an early kind of step forward in that realm has been the Planning Commission recently just recommended to approve an amendment to the city code allowing accessory dwelling units.
That's right.
In every zone that allows single family housing. I mean, that is a huge change, and that's going to be going before the city council in May.
Yep.
What potential do you see in accessory dwelling units, or ADUs as they're commonly called? And, just kind of talk about why this tool was chosen.
Okay. Well, again, this is an area where, again, we're following, we're not leading. There are a lot of other cities that have woken up to this, and from the since we came in the door, again, things do take longer here. I've been advocating for the idea, and it sort of took this long. One of the issues was getting a new planning director in place. But look, I mean, as far as potential, it could nearly double back to the supply and demand issue, our supply of housing, right? Because if not that it would happen, I mean, but if everybody chose to build a little garage apartment in their R1 single family house, and it almost doesn't matter, if it's your grandmother or a college student, or your, it just, or if you're just going to rent it out to somebody off the street, right? You have created that much housing supply, and you've created value in the home itself, because you've created the net present value of the future stream of incomes for what that thing would rent for. It's always and forever a good thing. I think the United States has woken up to that in general. So we are just really just kind of jumping on the bandwagon.
So I want to play devil's advocate for a minute and talk about, in my experience, I'm a civil engineer. I work in development. I go to these planning commission meetings, and I see the kinds of opposition that density tends to bring, even if it's something as simple as changing an R1 parcel to an R2 parcel to allow a duplex in a traditionally single family neighborhood. Whereas, allowing ADUs by right is not quite the same, but similar to almost changing the entire city to R2 zoning. And this is something that people worry about impacts to their property values. And this plays directly into that affordable housing piece because, you can protect high home values or you can promote affordable housing. I don't really see a way to do both.
Yeah.
So I guess just give the pitch to our listeners of why this collective agreement to add density in every zone in the city is beneficial to everyone.
Well, again, it is a balancing act, right, between supply and demand. And one thing that was left out of that prior example is that, I mean, again, if you increase supply, demand stays the same, prices will fall, right? So you're right. But I think if you look at this meteoric rise in home prices, it's out of balance. And it is in fact a balancing act. It's not as though the world's going to go out and suddenly, I doubt hire contractors to go build garage apartments. In some respects, I hope they do, but it's not realistic, right? So, and you said it yourself, right? It's almost like automatically rezoning to R2, but it's not. There are some fundamental and key differences there that make it different. I don't, again, in this case, if you think about it, remaining within a single family, parcel and unit, it's going to increase the value of those houses, not decrease it because of that stream of rental income. So it's not that's not a concern that I have. Although, again, we haven't talked about short-term vacation rentals yet, but the economics matter, right? I had a developer that called me and said, when that moratorium was introduced, which, by the way, council introduced it, and I agreed with it, but I from the mayor's office did not. And he said, man, I just lost a sale on a $500,000 townhouse on the south side because of that. And I'm sorry, man. And yeah, I mean, that's, but seriously, right? I mean, what does that tell you? It tells you that somebody who didn't live here, wasn't going to live in it, and was monetizing it through, the higher cash flows that come from renting the thing daily, and it's taking a unit that somebody could live in off the market. So does it mean that housing prices are going to taper off? I damn sure hope so, because it can't keep on like it's keeping on, and expect people to be able to afford to live in Chattanooga on a working wage.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is a little broader. We're zooming out a bit, but the city recently released a zoning analysis performed by a consulting company, Camaros.
Yep.
I think I'm pronouncing that right,
You are.
maybe. This analysis, it's available on the city zoning website for anybody listening, and I'll link it in the show notes. But it makes some very broad recommendations, which essentially amounts to a complete overhaul of our zoning code.
Yep.
I mean, it is very broad in its recommendations. How is your administration going to pursue further action on these recommendations? What's kind of the timeline?
It's full speed ahead.
What does it look like?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is one of the projects that I came in the door talking about, and we are proceeding apace because our current zoning code is complicated. It's twisted. I mean, I think if you read the executive summary, they're polite. But there are many cases in which, ordinance and zoning code are messed up and mixed up. It's a basket case. So we have the really great natural experiment, an example of the fact that Knoxville just went through this right up the road for anybody that's really interested in this sort of thing. And they were very, very happy with the results. But, I mean, the idea here is to simplify the zoning code to make it, I mean, I'm sure there are some people listening who are the policy wonk types, like you and I, but but zoning, it should not be, calculus, right? I mean, rank and file folks in Chattanooga should at least understand the broad strokes and be able to. And again, that's the idea, is to make it simpler, to make it more flexible, to make it more commonsensical. And very frankly, I think the planning community has woken up, I know, collectively, to their role in equitable housing policies, and that needs to be corrected as well.
Right. Well, that's exciting because zoning is a personal hobby horse of mine, and I've said before that you shouldn't have to hire a lawyer or a civil engineer to understand your zoning code. Anyone with a middle school education should be able to read it and know what they can do with their property.
Hell yes, absolutely. It should be in plain English. I mean, it's a simple litmus test, right? Same thing's true, I might add, of the sign ordinance here, which, again, we will get to eventually, but good luck with that. I think that we covered this on the first podcast we did, but you really want to see a really, really great example of the bullshit that we're cursed with currently. Go download the current city sign ordinance off the website. I think it's 80 pages or something. I mean, it's incomprehensible. I don't even know a lawyer that can faithfully interpret it, and it's awful. So zoning is more important and more impactful. So we're starting there, but by God, we'll get to the sign ordinance eventually, because that is broadly. Chris Anderson is now here, focused on that project and that project alone, and just setting them up and knocking them down one project at a time. And zoning is the most important, and it's going to take the longest to fix. So that's where we're starting. Yeah.
So how does that coordination look between the executive office here and the city council, who actually, I mean, they're in charge of zoning.
Absolutely.
For the charter, that's entirely their bailiwick,
Yep.
and you can make recommendations, but it's up to the council to say yes or no.
And that's why Chris is the perfect guy for the job, and it's a tough job, but that's why it is his sole focus, because essentially he has to go out, work with Dan Reuter on recommendations in Camaros, and then connect with the city attorney's office to make sure that the whole thing works legally, and then connect with council, explain it to council, get their feedback, make sure that they're all on the same page and that we have the votes, and then try to get it passed and then move on to the next one. So it's, not nothing. I mean, it's a full-time job.
Lift.
It's a big lift. But Chris is the right guy. He worked in the building industry. He gets a lot of stick for, a lot of people are like, because you can agree or disagree with some of the policies of contractors that he's worked for, but he knows the landscape is the point. He knows it well. And, as a former city councilman, he also understands the legislative piece. He understands best practice. So I think he's really the right guy for the job.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about homelessness, which is in a lot of ways downstream from this affordable housing issue. Definitely not a one-to-one relationship.
No, but it's
related.
certainly related.
And one big plan that people have been hearing a lot about is the idea for a city-sanctioned homeless camp.
Yep.
Down near the 11th Street area. And I just want to know, what is the status of that?
Yep.
What hurdles remain to be overcome? And, where can we kind of find out more about that plan?
So it should be, knock on wood, open on May 15th.
Wow.
That's,
okay.
That's the idea. It's taken too long, very frankly. I'm considering the notion of declaring a state of emergency around homelessness based on our point in time count that we just got. It hit me last week that it's like part of the problem. I mean, I've been in here a year and we really haven't made. Now we've done some significant things that people haven't seen. We funded an eviction prevention initiative that's kept 400 people from being evicted, or the homeless problem would be even worse. Mm-hmm. But it's frustrating to me that we haven't made more tangible, demonstrable progress. And we just need to treat it like an emergency. It is an emergency. I mean, we're seeing that from the numbers. So that would speed things up if we do declare a state of emergency around homelessness. But the fact is, the camp will be open again, everything on track on May the 15th. The holdup is, it will be sanctioned in that it will be actively managed. And we're in the process of working through the scope of work and the contract with the provider that will look after the camp. And then we're also talking to Pallet, a company out in Washington that actually manufactures these kind of miniature houses that can act as temporary shelter to put some on the site. As there'll be tents out there as well. So it's happening, just not quite as quickly as I'd like. And and we look forward to scaling that from there and really creating, a ladder so that we can get folks kind of up and out to include supportive housing and, the motel we purchased as well.
Mm-hmm. So is there going to be any services associated with this camp at opening, or is that kind of a longer term?
I think it'll be a longer term thing, and not long thereafter, but shortly thereafter, it will ramp up.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I want to move on, shift topics almost entirely, and talk about something might be a little controversial, but I want to talk about the Lookout Stadium.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And the letter you sent to the governor. If you could just explain to everyone kind of what the ask is, just lay it out. And say,
I'll give you the whole background.
What are we asking for? I guess the main background is should or should we not have public money go to fund a stadium for the Lookouts on the old Wheel and Foundry U.S. pipe site?
Yep, exactly.
So what was your ask to the governor?
$13 million. And that was based on the fact that Knoxville had just gotten 13. Actually, I take it back. It was 20 because what we were looking for is $7 million for brownfield cleanup.
Yes, it's a very dirty site.
Yeah, and then 13 for a subsidy of the project itself. That was based on the fact that Randy Boyd, former gubernatorial candidate himself and the current president of the University of Tennessee, had moved a minor league team to Knoxville and had gotten a $13 million subsidy. And so the idea was, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Why not, right? The state has got a lot of money right now, a lot of excess cash. Not, as I'm reminded very often, that doesn't mean that they should just go give it away. But unlike Knoxville, where they only had, I think 6 or 7 acres on the apron to develop, as I've said many times, this is not about subsidizing the lookouts per se. It's about what it's going to take to create that anchor tenant to develop and here, again, unlike Knoxville, there's 130 or so acres around that site, which if we can kick off, and it is very much like a pump priming or fire starting exercise, a cycle of investment at that site, will wind up producing a ton of jobs, a ton of tax revenue, and public benefit that will far exceed any amount of public subsidy from the state or from the city or the county. Mm-hmm. And I should add, kind of a administrative oversight on our part, not having the county mayor countersign that letter, but 100% on the same page with Jim Coppinger and the county mayor. All those discussions began in earnest together and in parallel. So it was really Mayor Coppinger and I making that ask. Look, I'm a big fan of the but-for rule, right? I mean, so there has to be public benefit. But in this case, again, the math is really compelling. We would, we're working through it now. We're not, doesn't look like going to get the money from the state, which is disappointing considering the fact that apparently, the state felt it was right to, give the Titans $500 million for a stadium. Memphis got 30-something odd million dollars for various. They weren't sports related, but they were somewhat. They got a new. I think they've got some cruise ships coming in there, and they got some money that are along the same lines. And I should say, I can't really lay this at the governor's feet. Oddly enough, it was members of our own delegation who kind of shot it out of the saddle. Mm-hmm. I will say we're fortunate for the there's sort of an instant tax increment financing provision built into the sports authority's bond issuing authority, so that tax revenue generated inside the stadium goes to help pay to relieve the debt, and that's baked in. But again, this is really getting in the weeds. But they had put a population cap on that for whatever reason that they did get or are getting lifted, I believe, and that's good. That's positive. So it's not nothing,
right?
But I can't say, I'd be lying if I say I wasn't disappointed in the fact that apparently, every other major city in the state, is good enough for direct subsidy from the state of Tennessee, but not Chattanooga.
So I understand, and people I've talked to understand why this particular site is under the microscope for receiving state funding. It's the gateway to Chattanooga if you're coming from Alabama or Nashville, or you come around Moccasin Bend and boom, you see the old Wheel and Foundry warehouse, and it's just bombed out, and it looks rough. But it's right along a major corridor to downtown, both from the interstate and on Broad Street. So it makes sense why that is a candidate for public funds. But the question I've received a lot, and the question I'm asking myself is why this project? Stadiums have historically, dozens of economic studies have shown that stadiums generally are not a great use of public funds. They usually have very low return on investment. They can pick up and move. They can pick up and move, and sometimes even in the case of minor league baseball. I mean, minor league baseball is not in the strongest position right now. So I'm just curious why this project and not any number of other possible anchors.
I'd say this: the studies that you're referencing generally are based around studies of stadiums around the Olympics, right? So it's a scale question. Olympic scale investments and investment in stadiums don't work. I mean, that has been shown, right? Cities that host the Olympics generally are making very bad bets, but this is not that. This is not that, right? We're talking about a relatively, in the greater scheme of civic investment, a relatively paltry sum of money. Again, look at the Titans idea. Two, again, look, I started what is now a professional soccer team without a dime of public money. I'm not defending the American sports oligarchy. I'm a huge foe of it, but it is what it is. We are not going to change that. And if we don't build a new stadium down there, the Lookouts will leave. It's the second oldest minor league baseball team in the country. So, I mean, that's not a good thing objectively, right? And third, again, there hasn't been a professional sports stadium built anywhere in this country in the last probably 20, 25 years without some public subsidy. Right. So I think the only utility to me publicly is that again, there's a reason that it happens despite all that over and over again around the country, because it does spur public investment, or rather private investment and public investment in the surrounding area. We went to Columbia, South Carolina, very, very similar market, very similar situation on a couple of 100 acres, where in fact, it has already unlocked a couple $100 million. And I think on the Wheeling site, I think the high end estimates probably it will wind up unlocking $500 million to perhaps even $1 billion of investment. And that will create a massive lift in terms of not only property tax, but sales tax, jobs, et cetera. So the fact that it's baseball is almost inconsequential to me. I mean, I'm looking at it strictly from the utility of it being an anchor tenant to unlock the rest of the investment. Because I'm not an endorser, nor am I again, Chattanooga FC was started without it. Not only that, not only did we never take it down with public money, we kind of put money back in the coffers because we made Finley Stadium solvent, which it was not before, and having to take public money. So I'm not defending, again, different podcast. I'm happy to come on and talk about how messed up the fact that a lot of billionaires basically run professional sports in the United States and throw their weight around. Not here to defend that in any way, shape, or form. But this is a really relatively cheap date. And if we weren't getting more out of it than we were putting into it, I would not be for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's what it boils down to is, like you said, no stadium has been built in the last several decades without public money. But there's a growing understanding that maybe that shouldn't be the case anymore.
Listen, I agree, but like I'm the mayor now. This is on my watch, right? And if the Lookouts, again, who've been here, who are an integral part of the city's history, pick up stakes and leave. And again, look, I'm a sworn foe of the franchise system. Shifting over to the soccer world, I mean, look, the soccer team we founded is literally founded in diametrical opposition to the franchise system, because I think it is obscene, that the Oakland Raiders pick up and move to Las Vegas and just completely ditch their fans. It is, if you look at the way soccer works on the rest of the planet, it's completely antithetical to localism, a sense of place, community engagement. Teams should never leave their communities. I despise the franchise system, but it ain't about that for me. It really is about the utility of this idea in the public interest. And again, if it didn't have sufficient utility, I wouldn't be for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to move on and zoom back out a little bit and talk about COVID recovery.
Sure.
I guess the biggest question right now is, we've got a lot of money coming in from the federal government. Some of it has already come in. So kind of what is the status of that ARP money? I know there's a commission that's been put together to kind of lead that charge. Just give us a status update.
So I believe the draft report was just published. If not, it will be in the next day or two. Again, we convened, just for those who are catching up at home, we received about $39.5 million from the federal government for the purpose of the American Rescue Plan Act. Some of that money early on was carved out for immediate relief, but the bulk of it we left aside and said we will form an equitable recovery commission, completely independent. These stacks are actually what you're looking at on this table are the applications that we got. And we hired an outside consultant. And this board went about it. And I mean, I'm telling you, they went about it completely independently. I was not in one of the meetings. I mean, and it was great because it allowed them to work in parallel. Again, they looked at the One Chattanooga plan, was very gratified by the fact that they didn't, tear it up and start over. They bought it, and they worked within that framework. And so, again, these stacks are all the requests. Now, what we did was essentially ask the commission to set the framework rather than giving them a checkbook and saying, okay, the whole point of this was to take the politics out of it, so that it wouldn't be a situation where it's like, oh, I know the mayor and the mayor's buddy, and that is not what we're trying to do in any way, shape, or form. So the idea was for them to, again, set this framework. We got some really fantastic creative requests in. And now that we have the framework from the commission, and again, I think that report is out. If not, it will be out very shortly for the public to read. We'll kind of go back to the well. In many cases, we've got submissions that are overlapping, or where you've got a couple of nonprofits who really should be joining forces to try to address a problem, and then making final recommendations, I guess, in another month or two.
So we'll be seeing those recommendations soon, and I'm looking forward to that.
Yep.
I'm also curious, more from I don't know, maybe business development standpoint almost. What is your administration doing to keep up with the economic and cultural shifts that COVID has accelerated? So things like work from home.
Yeah.
A lot of people not just working from home here in town, but working from home when their company is across the country.
Yeah.
And people moving from large, more expensive cities to Chattanooga and maybe warping the market a little bit. So what is the administration's framework around these issues?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we're all trying to get our hands around it. I do think the externalities of COVID, again, over and above the actual medical, pandemic, in many ways are much more impactful, certainly down the road. I was on a call with a group of other mayors from around the country, and with a Harvard professor who was, I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me, but he pointed out that, look, all these terrible things that mayors are dealing with, from affordable housing issues to homelessness, to mental health and addiction, domestic violence, youth violence. These are all parts of the same whole. It's as though, as I've said, somebody just took a waterbed and went, woof, just pushed down on it and just created this terrible ripple effect of disruption. So, look, we are wrestling each one of them to the ground on their own merits. I'll say the work from home thing obviously is a good thing on the balance for Chattanooga, but I think we'd be crazy to think that it's not related to our cuckoo clock, to our homelessness and our affordable housing issues. So that's part of the urgency behind the Affordable Housing Fund, because, as I've said many times before, what's become much, much clearer to me in the last month or so is that I can do all the economic recruitment with my right hand that I want. But if I'm not also, with my left hand, helping to solve affordable housing and workforce development issues, it's all for naught. Mm-hmm. It's just going to create more problems than it solves. So it's both and, it's not either or.
Right. So one thing that a couple listeners brought up is the idea of like a remote work program that Tulsa just instituted a program. I think it's $10,000 of basically a relocation bonus.
Yep.
Say, you've got a great job, you're spending a lot of money, come live here and we'll give you $10,000 to help you relocate. Yep. Do you think that is something that would be beneficial to Chattanooga? Is that something your administration has considered?
We definitely have. We have considered it. But again, it's like, we're reading as a cabinet, we're reading Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, which is, it's not terribly profound, but it around the project of kind of reframing city culture around purpose. But it's relevant to this conversation in that, one of the points that he makes is there are only really two ways to change people, and that is to either manipulate them or to inspire them. Right. And manipulate generally has this pejorative sense, but I don't mean it in that sense. He doesn't mean it in that sense. But, we manipulate each other with money all the time. Right. I mean, if we pay somebody $10,000 to come here, which we could do, it's transitory, and it might not last. I think what's extraordinary about Chattanooga is that, it really is this fantastic place to live. And it becomes, to me, my charge to our team has been, how do we rather tell our story better so that people, from the gig and 10 gig fiber to all of our outdoor assets. What we're going to be doing, to answer your question finally, is really standing up in the same way that we do a really great job of marketing for tourism. We need to market for talent recruitment. And so that's what you can expect to see. We're going to use a lot of those same marketing assets that we use to bring people here to visit to get people to come here and live. So I think that's a better investment than just hanging dollars out for people to grab.
So I want to shift to some kind of rapid fire questions.
Yep.
Just things. This is mostly related to kind of things you talked about during your campaign.
Yeah.
So we'll start with as of December. I'm pulling from a Times Free Press article. Was the last thing I could find. Your business assets had not yet technically been placed into a blind trust as you had promised during the campaign. Has that been done?
It has been.
Yeah, it's been done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just lawyers. Yeah. Takes forever,
time.
but yeah, it's done. But I should say, Southern Honda, it's in East Ridge, so not in it, not in the trust, just because it's much less complicated. All my city related stuff is in the trust.
Okay. Yep. Next one. How are the potholes coming? What's kind of the framework there?
They're coming again. What I learned when I got here is that there was both good news and bad news. Actually, a lot more knowledge and forethought had gone into this. I mean, we keep track of a pavement condition index, a PCI, for every single road in Chattanooga and have tremendous amounts of data. And again, we knew as a city, prior administrations, that it was going to take $6 or $7 million to keep that PCI, that pavement condition index, at level.
Oh, wow. And
we were spending $3 million, which is pretty. It's pretty hard to swallow, knowing that we knew. And,
right.
But anyway, so we're spending 10. We're spending 10 this year. We spent 10 last budget year. We're spending 10 this year. We'll budget 10 for each year here just to try to catch up, and we will be caught up by then. And so it's going right. I got a little flack over the wintertime because people were like, "What happened? My roads are still crappy," but people don't. Paving crews don't really work over the winter for not so obvious reasons. But anyway, they're cranking back up now. And I think you'll see we now have, believe it or not, a pothole czar, sort of a pothole inspector that can go right out and evaluate a situation, see if it is in fact a pothole or if it's a road failure. Last but not least, we're working on a project to actually publish our schedule of what will be paved and where. We're a little hesitant to do that at first because the city council's got something to say about it. And of course, District 1 wants, there's a little bit of politics involved in that, but not a ton. We ought to be able to give people a rough idea of when they can expect their roads will be paved. And so that's coming soon.
Well, especially if there's data attached to that.
Of course.
Here's the PCI.
There's an actual
index.
number, I mean,
this is why this one's ahead of that one.
Okay. You got it.
So I look forward to seeing that. Almost tongue-in-cheek question, but not really. How does one summon the potholes are to come and look at their potholes?
311.
311.
And
I figured that was the answer.
Related to that, we are also in the process of, we've gone through, oh boy, I mean, God bless Tyson Morrison, the new technology services manager has got a lot on his plate, and we are on we were at the cusp of relaunching 311 a couple of times, and frankly, I sent him back to the well and said it's not good enough, it's not ready. When it is done, again, we're going to be redoing the whole city website, and the idea is to try to integrate that in a thoughtful way with 311, with a better 311, and seeing if we can fold in a lot of smart city related crowd-funded app functionality to really, put us out on the forefront of what it means to be a smart city. So that is happening. And meanwhile, 311, I mean, I use it. I'm sure a lot of listeners do. It's not great, but doesn't suck. I mean, it does the basic
works,
stuff,
yeah.
right? You can request a brush pickup. I mean, and more to the point, Red Bank doesn't have one. East Ridge doesn't have one. I mean, it is a nice benefit, but it could be better. And as everybody here knows, one of my watchwords is good as the enemy of great. So we're pushing forward, and it will be great when we're done with it.
Is there a timeline for that kind of digital overhaul, or is it still?
Yeah, I mean, boy, howdy,
that's
that's the thing in government, right? There's an RFP, and there's So it's by the end of this year, we'll be digging into it. It won't be done. I would say, under promise and over deliver, probably really by this time next year.
Okay.
But it'll be done, I would expect. Yeah.
So you campaigned heavily on early childhood education, saying you would dedicate every extra dime in the couch cushions to early childhood education. Yep. What progress has been made in that zone, and what's kind of the future?
Well, candidly, I wouldn't say we got over a barrel as much as we were watching the federal legislation, because Build Back Better legislation that was proposed on the Biden administration, the core of the whole thing was universal early pre-K. And we thought, well, if that's happening, then we need to kind of get the structure in place for that. And again, without getting too in the weeds of federal politics, I'm given to understand that Joe Manchin, who was the hitch and the giddy up on a lot of the Build Back Better stuff, has always been pro early childhood. So we'll see at this point, and that's kind of where we are. Now, in the meantime, it's not like we've been doing nothing. Again, a lot of this has been, as we started the podcast saying, rewiring. We've got a new head of the department in Caritza Mosley Jones, who was there from the very beginning and knows her stuff extremely well. And we're in the process of kind of rebooting Head Start and really trying to, again, get it ready so that if the federal money does come, and I'm cautiously optimistic that it will, we'll be ready to roll. I should also say, too, that we're working really closely with the Hamilton County school system and Chattanooga 2.0, really hand in glove on a number of projects, that one included, to kind of improve the whole educational ecosystem.
Good. So in our first interview, I asked, what is one thing that you are completely confident you can get done? And you said you would retime the traffic signals.
Yeah.
Is that still a goal? And if so,
yeah.
How's it coming?
Is it a goal?
What's the timeline there?
So, boy, talk about frustrating things. So when we got into office, we moved signalization from from the Public Works Department to IT, because that's really where it belongs.
Interesting.
And then we had a change in the head of IT, and we discovered that although it is best practice to retime traffic lights every 3 years, we hadn't retimed ours in 10 years. So again, probably shouldn't surprise anybody that they're pulling their hair out like me. And then we discover, we need to apply to the state for the grant to retime the lights, and that has just now turned around like 6 months later. I mean, all the old adages about everything taking forever in government are unfortunately true. So it is happening. I can tell you that the team in IT has retimed or is in the process of playing with some twinning some scenarios to look at some key corridors to retime them. So again, it's kind of a microcosm of the entire first year. It's happening, just not quite fast enough.
Right. That's exciting, though. I never would have thought of moving that from transportation to IT. So that's interesting.
Yes,
one of your campaign goals, and this is also related to transportation, was to make major charter routes free.
Yeah.
Is this still a goal, and what is the status there?
It is still a goal. And again, COVID, I guess perhaps naively, I thought COVID would be done earlier. CARTA is just now kind of scraping back together and coming up for air. And so that remains to be, kind of executed. I think that our goal is to get that done by sometime in the middle of next year to be able to budget that in a way. I will say this too, which is kind of exciting. We are in the process of investigating sort of a municipal ID program that could also double as a CARTA pass card, so that, we would be able to target certain residents and make either the whole system free for them or certain routes free. So it's gotten more complicated. To make matters even more complicated, there is now a company that we and I'm excited about this, contracted with to begin working with, called Via, that is essentially the Uber of public transportation. So imagine that you've got an app and you just just like you take an Uber. You call a bus, and that's another possibility. So it went from being a fairly simple idea to suddenly getting a lot more complicated. But we're still dedicated to doing it and maybe able to actually expand the access. The question is, what exactly does it look like?
Right.
It doesn't make sense to let's take the number 3 line and just make that one free, right? That was kind of where we wound up settling. We can do better than that. And I guess that's what I'm saying is we're in the process of trying to figure out what better looks like.
One last transportation-related question. One of your campaign ideas was to promote discounted or free parking, some kind of scheme like that for residents, or some kind of perk for residents, especially in the downtown area. How's that going?
Not fast enough. That's another one where, it's a CARTA thing. It's a CARTA deal. We've met with Park Mobile a couple of times. The technology definitely exists to be able to do this. It's just, candidly, again, CARTA is not a city department. We didn't talk about the airport. Also not a city department. I've spent a lot of time. In fact, I met with Lisa from CARTA this morning, really trying to light a fire under some of these organizations to move faster. But they have their own boards, they have their own management, and I can control the purse strings. That's about it. So again, I'm going to stay at it until it happens, but it's not a snap your fingers thing.
Right. Let's see. So another of your campaign goals was to give the city council a legislative analyst.
Yeah.
And I think I heard some news about this that's being run through UTC.
That's right.
How does that work? And is any of that information publicly available in terms of like what their recommendations or reviews are?
I honestly do not know because it's in their budget. Okay. But I think that's I didn't want to go try to tell them how to run their stuff. But I do think that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, again, it's we also talked about, splitting the city attorney function and having their attorney and our attorney, and we haven't done that. And but we want to make sure they got the information they needed, and that's how it panned out.
Right.
So it's in their budget. It should be public, but it's a contract relationship with a consultant at UTC who they can bounce out things to on a on an as needed basis for analysis and feedback.
Okay. Yeah. I'll follow up with Darren on that then.
Yeah. And Darren's going to make a great chairman. I'm glad to see him as chairman. I mean, he's a very, very civic minded guy who gets it. And, obviously, has his asserted political affiliation, but I will say it has never gotten in the way of common sense for him. And so we're going to be able to get a lot done together.
Yeah. One of the favorite interviews that I've done so far was back when he was the zoning chair.
He knows it cold.
He knows it like the back of his hand.
He does.
It was a great interview, and I recommend it, especially with the questions we've already covered. If anybody's confused about zoning, go listen to that one. Let's see. What are your thoughts on the upcoming county mayor election? I'll split this into 2 parts.
Okay.
One is a little loaded and one is not.
Okay.
Are you willing to endorse any of the candidates?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I've got to work with any of them, and it wouldn't be right, and so that's a hard no. Yeah.
Right. Can you give us some insight on how you plan to make that transition to working with a new partner?
I know them all, right? And I can work with all, and they all have their strong points. So we'll see what, the voters decide, but I look forward to working with any of them and all of them. I'm never going to let, I can only control what I can control, and I know, but I'm never going to let, my ego or anything on my end, pollute or impede, that relationship, because it's just too important to Chattanooga broadly. And I will say, conversely, I think each of those 3 understands that as well. I know Mayor Coppinger has made it abundantly clear to all of them that is like key. And of course, he can't compel them to do anything, but I think they've all, certainly said the right things, and I believe they understand that as well.
Mm. So somewhat related to this, and this might be dependent on who wins this election.
Yep.
You mentioned the possibility of combining city and county wastewater treatment plants to kind of gain some efficiency there. Is that still in the works? How much control do we even have over that?
We have total control over it. I will say the city really has the ace of spades, as it were, in that the treatment plant is ours. And the treatment plant can handle, again, little known fact, the treatment plant can handle many, many times the capacity that it's currently handling.
That is a common misconception.
Yeah, the problem is it's a peak and valley problem,
mm-hmm.
right? And so that's where these, we're in the process of building these basically overflow tanks, for lack of a better term. They hate that. Jacobs, the engineering company, says, don't call them that. But I don't know anybody that objects to that. I mean, that's all they're there to do is catch. Again, we may have covered this, we may not have, but many people may not realize Chattanooga gets more annual rainfall a year than Seattle, and when it comes right in the summertime in particular, it's torrential, mm-hmm. and that overwhelms the system, pushing sewage out in the river. Hence the problem, right? So we've got to have a way to capture those and then trickle them back through the system in a way that can handle the flow. That's it. It's not that complicated at the end of the day. However, the eastern parts of the county that are far, far away from this stuff they are about to go under a consent decree themselves. And when they do, it's going to get real expensive. And a lot of folks out there who are anti-development and anti-growth, they're going to want the merger, because otherwise, the city's going to continue to kind of we'll see rate growth. I mean, that's baked in, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be real tough for them. So it would be good for the city and the county, but I would say the county is probably going to need it a little worse than the city. And that's important to the city because, again, we can't annex anymore. Not that we would necessarily, but if the metro is going to continue on a steady, sustainable rate of economic growth, we've got to look at it as one whole, mm-hmm. and that's what I do.
So I've got two more quick questions. Yep. I know we're running short on time here, but this year's property tax increase took many people kind of by surprise. The combination of not really taking advantage of the prorated tax rate and combining that with the huge increase in property values that we've seen. People are just kind of wondering, was it really necessary, especially during a year that so many people are struggling with COVID and kind of how that might look in the future as well?
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it in the future. I will say, unfortunately, the scenario I inherited, which, again, was not necessarily malfeasance or neglect on the part of prior administrations, but a lot of it was, was COVID. COVID related, and the fact that, but the bottom line is we had a pay study that was never implemented, mm-hmm. That I inherited when I came in, and again, our first responders were way off the mark, and we were losing people, left and right, and this is a problem everywhere. I think, knock on wood, we're starting to see kind of wage inflation flatten out a bit. So again, 24% is a huge bump. I understand that. And and they, I should say, as well, are eternally grateful for the taxpayers' generosity and forbearance, but it was absolutely necessary. Every dime of that increment, of that increase, went to pay for raises for fire, police, and public works. That's that simple, really. The millage rate, I should add, went down.
Yeah,
it's just slightly. It's just that the property taxes, the appraisals went up, mm-hmm. As we know. So, but I don't see. I think we've got a pay increase, a reasonable increase in pay built into the budget this year, but we're not.
There's no more 20% increases.
No, I don't.
Needed.
I mean, the fact that we had to do. If you kind of, or listeners think about the counterfactual, right? If you go to your boss and say, and they've got to give you a 24% raise just to catch you up, how bad have they been, how badly have they been treating you to that point, right? I mean, it was obscene that we even had to do that. I mean, it was not, all we did was get them back to even. We just got them back to scale based on a third party, study. So it was unfortunately just flatly necessary.
And then last question, Patreon subscribers get to have their questions read on air. So this is from a patron.
Yeah, that's great.
During your campaign, you expressed interest in getting CPD out of traffic enforcement.
Yeah.
Is this still a goal you wish to achieve? If so, how can the public make it happen? And I'll add on to that. not just how can the public help make it happen, but what kind of is the mechanism that you would be pursuing?
Yeah. So there are a lot of things that we have talked about with CPD and CPD reform. Frankly, again, a lot of these issues that we've covered today have been hanging fire, waiting on a position to be filled. And that, to the point about our dysfunction in HR, it's just been tough, right? Because anybody that's ever managed anything knows, right? You don't present incoming departmental directors or managers with fait accomplis, right? With things that, hey, by the way, we're in the middle of this, right? In a perfect world, even in, a reasonably ideal world, you wait, get the person in place, and then let them take a couple deep breaths, and then you begin. Well, that's where we are with Chief Murphy, right? Chief Murphy really just started. And that will be one of the things that we will discuss. Candidly, we've got a lot more urgent things to discuss. The department has been really, over and above the pay deficit. I think pretty badly. They haven't been well taken care of from the city side of things. I think a lot of cops have felt neglected and underappreciated. The communication between the department and the rest of the city and the mayor's office has not been great. So we're mending fences, right? And we're trying to get back on the good foot, and kind of, the same sort of rebooting of culture that we're doing here really, really applies there. And again, first real tactical, project is really the alternative response unit. We're having great success there with a couple of officers and one social worker, a woman named Jenna Parker, who's just done a fantastic job. But, that's got to scale and scale for impact. And so that's going to be really job one. Community policing in general, right? It comes with a lot of different changes in the way that routine happens, and, getting officers out of cars and into the neighborhoods in a more visible way. Getting youth more involved. Those things are all going to come first, but I at some point we will certainly look at outsourcing traffic enforcement, because I do think that makes sense. And to be clear, from the campaign, it wasn't so much traffic enforcement as it was, if I recall correctly, like accident reporting, things of that nature. That stuff is really more forensic in nature and administrative, and that's not really what a cop wants to be doing. So, we will take a look at it, but it ain't going to be tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's all the questions I have. I do want to give you an opportunity if there's any other upcoming news that you want to share. I just want to give you the opportunity.
Yeah, I appreciate it. No, we've talked about, we've been around the horn. I would just ask people to, okay, I'll put a shout out for Chatham Matters, right? Because it's very much related to what I know you're passionate about, and I am as well. And that is, it's a really cool project that's being run by a very talented woman named Mary Helen Montgomery over at the Enterprise Center. The thesis is basically that, and I know you know this or you wouldn't be here, and your subscribers know it or they wouldn't have paid to listen, and they should be paying if they're not. But broadly speaking, right, the state of paid media, for lack of a better term, in the United States is sick unto dying. It's not in good shape. In mid-sized markets like Chattanooga, it's really bad, right? We're lucky we've got some veteran reporters at the broadcast stations, but for the most part, we have this high churn of really young reporters that come and go. So there's no real continuity to the reporting because the business model is really fractured, and all these ad dollars are just spread super thin everywhere. They just pull in a bunch of syndicated content. I watch Good Morning Chattanooga a lot of times when I'm having my coffee, and it's not even Good Morning Chattanooga. It's just, it is to some extent. I should, shout out to Greg Funderburg and all those guys, because they do as well as they can, but they're, it's not local. They don't have good There's a lot local content about local fluff. Issues. Yep. And look, again, not to be too alarmist about it, and not to make people roll their eyes, but democracy itself is really under assault. It's being slowly boiled to death, right? And to me, the way I think you share this, the way you repair it is by getting people re-engaged with the basic mechanics of of civic government at the local level, municipal government, because that's when people begin to realize that it matters, when you go out and vote, and it matters to show up to meetings and to get involved and call people, because you can control things at the local level. That's how we reinvigorate democracy, right? Amen. So to that end, we've stood up this project with Mary Helen at the Enterprise Center called Chatham Matters. And what Chatham Matters will do is do what the local stations can't or won't do, which is generate long-form content about matters in the public interest. Not as propaganda from the mayor's office, but truly, like, what's going on here about this thing, right? And then syndicate it. They'll stand it up. They'll have their own EPB channel and run things there. But they'll also give it away, right? If Channel 9 or 3 or 12 or the radio station wants to run a feature, they can run it. It's free content. So it helps their business model too, because they're not having to pay for it. Yep. And so I'm very hopeful about that.
That's exciting. I grabbed coffee with Mary Helen a couple weeks ago and talked about this, and we talked about maybe even collaborating on a couple projects. That
would be great, man. I would love for her.
I really look forward to seeing what
you can stick a camera in here, and again, we're also so fortunate in Chattanooga to have EPB. People don't realize, like, having an electric and fiber utility with a stated mission of improving quality of life in your community is a massive asset. And so, they've been good enough to, again, tell us that hasn't happened yet, but, give us essentially a public access channel. And there's no reason you couldn't do this on a video camera and post it and run it on the channel, right? So I hope you guys can get together and do something, because it's important. It's really important.
Well, great. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're very busy, but I really appreciate this. And hopefully we can catch up again a year from now and see how the second year has gone.
I would love that, because hopefully I'll have a hell of a lot more progress to report. That's my goal.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Ned.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Chattanooga Civics. Our music was written and recorded by Kevin MacLeod. If you have any questions or feedback, please send me an email at chattanoogacivics@gmail.com. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram @chatcivics, or visit the website chattanoogacivics.com. Thanks for listening.